In this episode of our State of the Sitcom miniseries, we go back to the 90s with our special guests, Cathy and Dave from the Cinemile Podcast.
So grab your scrunchies and put on your hair gel as we head to Bayside High to discuss the classic Disney Channel sitcom, Saved by the Bell.
When I wake up in the morning and Judgecast.
Hello and welcome to Judgecast with myself, Joe Bowden, and this guy,
Jay Taylor.
You're listening to the second season of State of the Sitcom, where we review the entire sitcom genre from the early days to modern classics with a host of special guests.
And joining us this episode are Cathy and Dave from the widely acclaimed, award-winning podcast, The Cinemile.
Hello.
Hello.
That was a bit of an intro and a half there.
That was quite an intro.
Lovely intro. I love the widely acclaimed part.
I know. We'll never. I hope we can't live up to that now. You set us up to fall.
We've even read you in print. I mean, in this day and age, we've seen you on printed paper. That's just weird now.
Yes, that's because we printed off an A4 review of ourselves and posted it through your letterbox.
Thank you for that, by the way.
That's how you tweet, right?
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
So how are you guys? Thank you so much for joining.
We are great. Thank you. We're very excited to talk about Saved by the Bell.
Yes, thank you for inviting us on.
We are also very excited about this one. We've never done a young adult sitcom, shall we say?
No.
Of the youth.
Going back to the 90s.
So yeah, this is very exciting to cover.
But before we go into the sitcom you've chosen, can you just tell us a little bit more about the Cinemile?
Yes, so we're married, and so are you guys. This is are we the first married couple you've had on?
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Yes, you are.
Oh my god. Two married couples on the same podcast. This is
It's like
wild.
a smug married podcast.
Well, speak for yourself. We're not
It's like a
smug.
double date.
So yeah, we're married, and so we spend a lot of time together, and we go to the movies a lot, and so we just started recording our walk home from the movies together, and that's our podcast basically. It's widely acclaimed.
In a nutshell.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very easy for us to summarise it.
It's great because I like the simplicity of it, and when we started out, we used to drive a lot because the cinema was not where we were living. We had to drive to the thing, and so we started out with the idea of doing Reels on Wheels, which was a similar idea.
Oh, nice.
It was
And then-
difficult to say, though.
It was difficult to say, and then we realised that it didn't really work in cars. We got rid of our car, and we moved about 2 minutes walk from a cinema, so it kind of died at death, and we became Judgecast. So I'm glad you guys are still going and getting a bit of exercise with it. Not that you need it.
Yes, we'll never get a car.
What I really admire about you guys is that a lot of your podcasts are done as like a quick reaction, like you've just seen the film, and so you're kind of having to process that really quickly and have a quick opinion on it, which is really it's great because you're getting that immediate reaction. But have you ever had, and we've struggled because we've done that literally a couple of times, and then sort of gone, oh, I'm not sure actually if I still feel the same way about that. Have you had any films where you've kind of gone, actually over time I've changed my mind about it?
Yeah, we have actually, because the only time we don't record our instant reaction is if we've done something like maybe watch something on Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
But anytime we leave the cinema, we're not allowed to speak about the film to each other, and when we've guests on, we won't let them speak about it either until we hit record, so we don't know what the other one thinks generally, though usually you can tell if someone is enjoying a movie next to you or not. And then
Because Cathy goes going, oh, for fuck's sake.
but then we do, sometimes you might think something isn't particularly in depth or is a bit shallow, but then a couple of days later it can really resonate with you.
Yeah, and at the end of our we do an end of the year review, and on our latest one we did a category which was second chances, which addresses exactly what you're saying. And I think you're right, that is a common phenomenon where your opinion of something can change. I think for me personally, the one, often this happens years later. I watched Blade Runner when I was maybe 15 or 16 and didn't think much of it, and I couldn't get into the hype, and that was kind of my opinion for a long time, and I never revisited it, but then watched it last year again, and oh my god, I get it now. It's brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, Blade Runner in particular is a lot to take on, especially in your teens. Like, there's a lot there as well. So
yeah,
yeah.
And
I
it's
think
like
I
with
wasn't. Sorry, go.
Dave just wants to review Blade Runner, but one of the main things that we find is often actually you're in the cinema, you're having a fun time, you're with people you enjoy hanging out with. You might actually be more positive about a movie in that sense than if you just watch something at home by yourself.
Yeah.
So we can be sometimes very positive about like middle of the road movies, and like in retrospect we can barely remember them, but what we're capturing is the immediacy. So usually if we've seen a fun movie and we've had a fun time, we'll give it a good review.
But there's a real downside to that immediacy, in that almost always we get home and then the conversation carries on because we forgot to say a million things, or things occur to you later that you should have said. It's so that's always quite tricky to contend with, I think.
We've done that loads of times.
We did Game of Thrones most years, where we literally stop the TV as it finishes and then go straight into talking about it. And yeah, exactly what you said just there. We'll just give immediate reactions, and then just on the walk home, or if we'll just be lying in bed kind of going, and the conversation just keeps going, and you go, oh shit, I just didn't even bring up even half the episode.
Thanks for sharing with the world that we talk about Game of Thrones in bed. That just sounds
yeah, it's getting very intimate now.
But yeah, no, what's really cool is it, yeah, as you say, like it kind of like just captures your immediate feelings, and that's kind of the amazingness of cinema as well. That kind of that great experience thing.
That does help, guys. I can't wait for your new Game of Thrones podcast, Thrones in Bed. Or
the bed wedding.
Nice.
So, moving on.
Stay with the sitcom.
So, why did you choose Saved by the Bell?
I think, did I choose this? Did I, Cathy? I don't know.
I think we chose it because we wanted to come on and chat sitcoms with you guys, but we'd seen you'd already covered quite an exhaustive list of sitcoms.
You've done all the good ones.
You'd done a lot of the ones we might have chosen. And then we thought, kind of, when we were younger, what sitcoms we liked, and like accepting Friends, which is its own phenomenon, we both really loved Saved by the Bell. And it's not something it's essentially almost like a tween sitcom. I would say it's pretty pre-teen, really. If like it was on the Disney Channel originally, wasn't it, on like a Saturday morning? So it's just something we both loved as kids, and we were really interested to revisit it. And because it's definitely a sitcom, the structure of it, and we just kind of wanted to revisit it as adults, really, and like have the opportunity to chat about it and rewatch some of it. And
I think for me personally, I'm 34, so when I was watching this, I was I don't know, between 6 and 10, and then I guess it was rerun into oblivion. So basically through my I was bang on the demographic, early tween into teens, and this, I can't say that I related to these characters, because that would be stupid. Because basically, we were growing up in Ireland in the 90s. It's just a different world entirely to Bayside, and I would imagine even American high schools in reality weren't anything like this. This is real popcorn bubblegum fantasy, but it's a really appealing fantasy, and I think American culture had such an influence on most of us here in the UK and Ireland growing up. And this, to me, represents partly the sort of the pinnacle of 90s teen Americana, like the color, the beach, the sort of ridiculously attractive people. It's a beautiful fantasy, and I bought into it hook, line and sinker.
It was the Grease of our generation.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I totally get, and it's interesting because hearing you say that it was resolutely a sitcom, when you first mentioned it, I was like, was it? And I couldn't really remember it because I didn't have any like Disney Channel or anything, so I only remember it. I think it was ITV or Channel 4, and it did just seem to be on all the time. I remembered aspects of it, but I couldn't remember what an episode felt like, if that makes sense. You know how it just seemed to be on. It almost seemed like a snapshot of people's lives, rather. I don't remember the big. Yeah, it was. It was a color palette. But yeah, so it's really interesting when you brought it up, and then kind of revisiting it for research, actually remembering, like the big episodes, the ones where they touched on big issues of the day.
I can't wait to talk about that.
Yeah, it really hit home of like, oh my God, I did actually watch this so much, and it probably did form some of my ideas of what a sitcom was, but just without knowing about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's weird because obviously the characters are all like, what, I don't know, 16, 15, 16 at the beginning of it, maybe slightly younger.
I think they're younger because I think they're in like junior high, right? Or middle school or something. I think they're supposed to be like 15.
Well, Screech in that first season looks to like 12.
Yeah, he's as the actual actor was quite a bit young, or a couple of years younger than the rest of them. So I think he was supposed to look particularly.
I see them as in a UK equivalent starting senior school, so kind of between 12 and 13.
Oh, that makes so much more sense. I think maybe because I was watching it as you say, like, I'm a similar age, so I would have been like really young.
Don't I was a similar age.
No, I was a similar age to what Dave said he was.
Oh, right.
Same age as Lisa. Where was I going with this? Yeah, so I've always seen them as kind of like grown up. You know, it was still like, until we went back and looked at it, I was like still thinking of them as like these, like, not aspirational, because I'm not sure if they are, but definitely like these older beings. And it's weird that we were watching it like quite so young, but also the themes they were dealing with were about that.
No, I think you're right though. It was like, if we were watching it at age like 8, for example, and they're like playing, you know, really cool 15-year-olds, to us that would have been really aspirational. And I think they aged a lot because they were cast so young. So when you go from, because we were watching various bits last night, when you go from kind of the first few episodes up until the end of the last season, up until like, you know, the movie, they really age in front of you. And that is something I think is, you know, really cool about like a long running sitcom like that feeling of growing up with the characters. Like, you know, for example, in Friends, or, you know, that feeling of kind of growing up with the characters is something that like really resonated as a kid as well, I think. And it's funny, you know, you see Zack as like this skinny little boy, and by the end he's like this big man.
Yeah.
It was so weird. I hadn't remembered him as a young boy for years. It was only going back and watching some of the episodes where suddenly I was like, oh, I only remembered him as, well, he was probably about 20 in real life, but that older Zack with the jacket and the kind of the car, I didn't remember him.
Oh god, yeah, the whole thing with the car.
And I suppose they do drive a bit younger than us, but it just felt like they were so much more mature. And no one in my school was dealing with a caffeine pill addiction, so, you know, it just not that I know of. Maybe they were. I don't know.
You were at a different.
So scary.
It feels wrong watching that scene back, right? It's been done for laughs so many times in like The Simpsons, Family Guy, I think South Park, that I watched it back and was kind of laughing at it, and it was like it's done for really kind of important reasons and social issue of the day, and it's so difficult watching
but
this
hang on,
back.
were caffeine pills really a social issue of the day? Was it that big a problem that they had to do this?
Well, I think at the time in the 80s, people were getting really addicted to diet pills.
Yeah, prescription.
And I think this was essentially diet pills she was taking, but they're, you know, caffeinated. So I think it was actually an issue. And I do admire the show, as cheesy and naff as it is. I do admire all the issues that they did tackle, because really for a young audience, right, you want to have some morals.
And even in sort of the non-hard hitting kind of more like issue based ones, even if it's like Zack and Kelly going for a breakup and stuff, the way that they kind of handle like, oh, you know, this is how we should be nice to this person, and no matter what, they were still kind of trying to do this kind of moral lesson teaching.
It comes across as a little bit preachy, or almost like a PSA. Often though, and I think that's the thing with Saved by the Bell. There's no nuance or subtlety, and particularly if you compare it to a more recent sort of show in this genre, something like Glee, for instance.
But Glee isn't a sitcom.
No, fair.
And it's not aimed at kids this young, so I don't know that it's a fair comparison. Honestly, if you compare it, like from a perspective, even if you think of something like, I know I keep mentioning Friends, I swear I do know other sitcoms, but Friends was all very surface level, and like there's no time for nuance in a 19-minute sitcom that's played for laughs with 5 or 6 core characters who are all, you know, broad stereotypes. It's not a common part of a sitcom that you'd have nuance.
No, but but there's a difference between, you don't necessarily have to have nuance, like, but Friends, as an example that you brought up, didn't have an agenda, so to speak. Like, you can actually, this is basically G.I. Joe at the end of G.I. Joe when they've basically come out and say, hey, kids, don't do drugs.
Yeah, but Friends isn't aimed at kids. This is. You have to put in morals in kids' programs.
I know, but you can weave morals in a very interesting and clever way into good kids' TV writing, and I would argue this isn't very well handled in that regard. And it's definitely.
But then why are you talking about it 20 years after it aired? You clearly valued it.
No, well, I mean, I don't think it's held up very well at all from what we've seen. And I think, but it's a product of its time.
It's interesting because one of the things we brought up is being kids of the time, late 80s, early 90s. This feels so much more in tune with the Saturday morning cartoons. Exactly what you were saying about G.I. Joe, the He-Man aspect of things, that really moralistic side of things. But the difference of this is actually most of the cast, especially the lead character, was an absolute bellend. And I think that's what's really intriguing is you're watching this thing of going, this should be, hero. This should be the hero's journey. And actually, from so many early episodes, like how he treated going on a date with a girl in a wheelchair, and just some of these things that were just like, why did we ever relate to it? And how did they think it would sell by almost kind of putting their main character as he's the antagonist most of the time.
But he was a huge heartthrob as well at the time. Like, so many girls I was friends with at school were just like, oh my God, like Zack Morris is amazing. It's like, I mean, I didn't pick up on it at the time because I didn't have that kind of maturity. But yeah, looking back, you're like, my God, like every excuse he's got, he's paying someone to do something for him.
Yeah, I guess he's like that classic bad boy, right? And like obviously the 80s were a different time, and like it was perceived to be funny to act like he did. And he did. I mean, we probably all knew guys in school at that age who were like naughty and a bit mean, and they were the cool kid that everyone kind of aspired to be like. And I think Zack kind of captures that.
Yeah, he's kind of like Poochie from The Simpsons, isn't he? He's just radical and extreme cowabunga dude, and he wears his cap backwards, all that stuff.
Well, I was reading that the whole casting of the show, they were saying hinged on Zack Morris, and when they got this actor whose name escapes me, is it Mark Paul?
Mark Paul something.
Yeah, like within after one reading, they gave him the job because they were just so charmed by him, and like I think he managed to pull it off with a level of charm that another actor you would have just, like you said, just hated him basically.
I read that he only got the job because he in real life has the power to freeze time. And they thought he just slotted right in.
Well, that is something I want to talk about as well. The whole fourth wall breaking was like a real trend for the era, I feel, with like Clarissa Explains It All. Yeah. I think Fresh Prince did it sometimes as well, but it didn't dedicate itself to it. Whereas, Saved by the Bell is very much, I can tell you what I'm doing. And the only other show I can think of that does it that blatantly is House of Cards. Again, a guy that you don't really want to align yourself with. And it's like, why are they trying to get us on board, and why are they the only people who can see through the matrix?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's one of the tropes of the show that, like, to be fair, make it really unique, and it does make it a really different show. And maybe part of it is because Zack does do such unlikable stuff, like Frank from House of Cards, that we do need to hear his side of it. And it's just, I think it's really fun, and it captures like a lot of what I really like about some of this 80s stuff. And like obviously the color palette is crazy, and it is a fun, exuberant show that was commissioned for a Saturday morning. But that's just fun, like to put that in just really appealed to me as a kid, like that idea that you could do that and explain yourself and then resume time again. For me, it always really worked. I just loved it.
It's one of the only shows that I remember watching from around that time that did do that type of stuff. And for me, it doesn't always actually work. Like,
what, in Saved by the Bell or from other shows?
In Saved by the Bell. I didn't watch Clarissa, so I don't really remember that one.
Can't believe you didn't watch Clarissa.
I know. She did.
She knew it all.
And she was a witch, but I think that was a different show. But yeah, so it kind of just it does work for me a little bit when we watch it back, and he kind of does this holier than thou turning to and sometimes it's really creepy because it's like he's letting you in on plans that are quite. When we're watching it back with 2019 eyes, it's a little bit odd that someone's telling you like, wow, I'm about to do this.
Well, he could have done a lot worse things with that superpower. Let's face it.
So actually, we should be praising Zack Morris for the restraint he showed.
Yes, he's a hero, really. Yeah. Also, why wasn't he using that power for good?
Yeah,
he could have,
Yeah,
he could have prevented wars,
stopped climate change.
Yeah,
he definitely needs to let the House of Cards production team know that Mark Paul Gosselaar is available to take
to step in.
He's got the experience. He could do it with his eyes.
Actually, I have another question though on this topic. So, do we all think that Zack Morris ages during Time Out, and everybody else stops aging? I.e., is Zack Morris like an accumulated amount of hours older than the rest of his peers because of all this time out?
No, absolutely not.
And if he stayed in time out for days or weeks on end or years, I mean, could he just time in and then suddenly he's an old man?
Time out doesn't last that long.
I don't know. I really like this theory. I always kind of saw it as it was almost like a window into his inner dialogue, inner monologue.
Yeah.
That's the word, isn't it? Inner dialogue. Yeah.
I guess maybe I'm taking it too literally.
I think so. It's not a Marvel movie.
I like the idea, though. Zack Morris is actually like 500 years old.
All right, I'm just going to have to write this Saved by the Bell fan fiction and be done with it. It's the only way I'm going to get this out of my system.
But it's an interesting show when you look at the character archetypes, and there's always very clearly defined characters in sitcoms. And this one we've got Zack, who's the cheeky bad boy, but then I feel like Slater's kind of the cheeky bad boy as well.
They're definitely competed in the cheeky bad boy trope.
Yeah, but he can dance.
Yeah.
And then we've got Screech, who's the geek who annoys everyone, and then we've got Elisa, who is really rich and wears ridiculously expensive clothes and is really mean to Screech, quite mean, you would call it kind of bullying through today's eyes. And then Kelly is just nice, pretty girl next door. And then I can't remember what Elizabeth Banks. What's she called again in this? Yeah, so she's what I always quite liked is that she was really clever and she was a feminist and she did loads of things protesting against beauty pageants, and I always loved her for that. I thought she was quite cool. Yeah, and I never quite bought her and Slater as a couple. But yeah, so they have distinct looking characters, but they weren't quite that distinctive from a personality sense. I think, aside from the fact that Elizabeth Banks played someone who was a feminist and Lisa was quite wealthy. Other than that, the three women are very similar. And Slater and Zack were really similar as well, just looks wise, they look quite different. So they didn't quite, I don't know, they didn't quite make an interesting round of characters, I think.
But the way that Zack and Slater sit on chairs could not be more different.
Well, yeah. Because I think they're trying to Zack's preppy and Slater is street, but in fact they're not. There's no difference.
He knows his way around a car, but he can also wrestle. Yeah.
I mean, he's amazing. On a complete side note, we looked at some clips of the cast recently last night, and he has not aged a day. Mario Lopez, it's weird how good he looks.
Yeah, did you guys watch that Jimmy Fallon thing with the reunion?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, he looks the same, doesn't he?
It's unbelievable. I mean, they all look great. They're very, a bunch of very good-looking people who age very well. But Mario Lopez could be maybe 5 years older.
It's so weird, isn't it? And I completely get what you mean, Cathy, about it doesn't have the nuance of Friends, or something of the same. I don't know. It was around the same time. Those were kind of
slightly earlier than Friends,
but of just actually you could follow all the different characters. From what I remember, I don't remember many people having their own side adventures. It was very much what was Zack doing, and then everyone meeting and telling him their views on what he was doing.
Yeah, for sure. It's it doesn't feel like it's an ensemble, but it doesn't feel like, it's divided between the six characters equally, because it's not. It is the Zack show.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you said earlier that the casting hinged upon him. Did you know that Saved by the Bell itself was actually a spin-off of an earlier Disney Channel failed sitcom?
The way you say failed.
Called Good Morning, Miss Bliss.
I knew this because yesterday I read it somewhere and I never knew it before yesterday.
And it's weird because then that obviously, so then they signed up Saved by the Bell before Miss Bliss was that bad a ratings thing. So then they'd already had this spin-off that did well. And then, for my money, I think Saved by the Bell might have the most spin-offs of a sitcom ever. Like, it seems to have, like, the college years, the something else years, the freshman year. It just seems to keep going.
I knew
like,
the college years, right?
And
It
then
had the college years and it had the new class.
The new class,
Yeah.
where Screech came back. The Screech came back as the vice principal along
No, he
with
was
Mr.
like the
Belding.
assistant to Mr. Belding. And
Was
that
that
ran for I think the original series ran for 3 years, but that one ran for 6 years, which is really weird because nobody remembers it.
people,
I remember it. It was terrible.
Yeah.
I can't tell you a single other character except Screech and Mr. Belding.
Screech came back, and that's about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they did like TV movies. We did watch Zack and Kelly's wedding last night. It was beautiful.
So beautiful.
We should do Cinemile on that one.
I wish our wedding had been like that.
I know. But yeah, the fact that it was originally a spin-off, though, I never knew. And it's interesting that like Zack was just like, you know, they considered him so fantastic that they essentially gave him his own show, which is what this is.
Without even knowing what the ratings were for the original show. I mean, that shows some real confidence, right?
I mean, he's got star power. Like, they felt like he was completely charismatic and engaging, which I think he was. You know, really looking back at the clips when they're all really young, he was really strong.
Oh yeah, he totally like carries it off. As we said, like, you know, for a character like that, he really brings the charisma.
But the other key character, I think, in terms of looking at the new class and stuff like that, was Screech.
Yeah,
I think he was the memorable one. He was the one that was on like the kind of lunch boxes. He was I think they tried to make him out the everyman. He was the one that people maybe I was just a geek.
I think that might be where that's going. Yeah.
Yeah, if you relate to Screech, you were a geek.
well, it's funny because you have like geeks are always kind of the classics of like, you know, the John Hughes movies from the 80s and like The Outsiders. But I always related to geek characters, but I never related to Screech because I found the actor just that bit off and weird, and the voice he did was like too much for me. I couldn't get in. I couldn't get involved with it, and it's a shame because the rest of the characters are so kind of cool and popular. Like they definitely needed him to balance it, but I think he was just honestly too strange the way he played the role.
Didn't he collect Lisa's toenails or something?
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Did he? Oh, I don't remember that.
Yeah, there was some weird stuff.
And he's just the voice he put on was just weird. And I mean, obviously he was told to do it. It's not the actor's fault, but it got weirder as he got older.
Well, he's a cartoon character, really, Screech, and I mean, you mentioned sort of geek stereotypes. I don't think the show really did anything to play with that.
No.
He pretty much just is the idea, the classic idea of a dork, as they say, or a geek in these things. And I mean, on one hand, it's quite admirable of the show that they tried to, you know, posit this inclusive environment where he was friends with the cheerleader and the cool wrestler and the whatever, the class clown. But I mean, probably in reality, I can't imagine this group of people hanging out. So on one hand, I like applaud the show for trying to be better than itself, but at the same time, it didn't do anything to break out of stereotypes. They're all just composites of characters we already know.
It was the early 90s, so but I do remember thinking, like, how did these guys become friends? Like, at what point?
And he was I do see what you mean. Like he was OTT. He was.
Oh yeah, he was a classic like fool character.
Yeah,
like, yeah.
And it's interesting because then obviously he did get the star power with it. Like he was the known face. That's what I was trying to say. It's not that he was relatable as like that, but he was the one that I think people remembered. He was that kind of breakout role, as I think you'd call it now. Like not.
And he's the one who went on to the most amount of fame.
Fame or infame?
Infamous.
Yeah.
Well, I think he's the only standout because the rest of them are all just essentially versions of Zack. Like they're popular, they're good looking, they're cool. They vary slightly, but Screech is like, you're right, he's the only like really discernible character after Zack. Like they're the two that you think of, and he's so synonymous with this show. Like if it was like Mr. Belding, Zack, and Screech in a whole episode, you just probably wouldn't miss the others.
No, right. That definitely says me.
I mean, it's harsh but true.
Yeah, and I mean the fact that he was kept on for that
Yeah.
spin-off, which ran for 6 seasons, like does say a lot I guess, how they felt he could input into it. But yeah, it's a weird one. Like like now these days, like geek culture is like so cool and considered so cool. But you're right. He was more of a clown or a fool. And like the source of bullying, like how Lisa spoke to him was awful in those episodes. Like it was really awful behavior, and he was obsessed with her, wasn't he? Like,
absolutely obsessed, and he
Yeah,
wasn't.
I think maybe
remember.
that's the thing, is that we felt a little bit bad for him because he was basically being bullied, not just by her, but like by all the whole rest of the school as
Yeah.
well. Like they would stick up for him sometimes, but the rest of the school would also be like, yeah, and even like Mr. Belding, I think, was pretty rude to him.
I think he was used a lot by Mr. Belding. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then obviously, yes, he had quite a career afterwards.
He got really into knives.
Yeah.
it's a weird one because obviously it's such a strange thing when you see like anyone getting this famous, but for such a young cast to get so famous when they did, they were all a couple of years older than he was, Dustin Diamond. But he stayed in the show ecosystem longer. But it is sad that like when you think of afterwards, people at varying level of successes, and obviously, funnily enough, like Slater, Zack, and Kelly have probably had the most successful careers since.
Yeah.
But you know, obviously, like Elizabeth Banks has lots of infamous roles that she was in. But like, sadly, I think Lisa had a lot of issues, and Screech had a lot of issues, and it does make it's sad because you think if they had never been in the show, would their lives have turned out that way?
Exactly. It's that old question of child stardom. It can be wonderful, but it's also, I don't think there's anyone that's not anyone that seems to be out there that's not in some way been damaged by it or gone through really hurtful things. If you look at the Harry Potter kids, they've done quite well, but they definitely have gone through their fair share of shit, both on their own terms and abuse from whether it's the media or fans or whatever. You know, it must be hard. And if Saved by the Bell was big in Ireland and Gravesend, for fuck's sake, they must have been huge in America. Like, I can't even imagine it. They must have been everywhere.
Oh, they would have been, yeah. And like, I mean, obviously, like Kelly went on to be in 90210, and like, you know, Zack as an adult has like been really successful, and Mario Lopez has been like huge as a presenter. So they've carried it on. But I imagine they had that lull. You know, they weren't in big things always as well. And I think one of the weird things about being such a successful child star is that you've such a high level of exposure and attention, and then for that to go away must actually, like, I think, mess with some core part of your brain to suddenly not be getting all that adoration. It must be really weird.
Well, particularly when that happens at a very essentially a developmental stage of your life, when you're transitioning from being a child into an adult. And I think, biologically speaking, I think that teenagers are they become very self-centered, don't they? And they kind of lose kind of empathy and a lot of those things. And if suddenly you are literally the center of the world and people are telling you this, you know, what does that do to your mind? And to have all of that stripped and taken away from you must be a really traumatic experience. In many ways, I mean, this isn't really a fair comparison, but it's a bit like PTSD that soldiers experience.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's a world apart.
I don't think it's a fair comparison, but I know what you mean.
But it's a similar sort of effect. And I was.
I mean, it must be very traumatic when it ends. And like, obviously, Dustin Diamond has spent the rest of his life trying to chase that again. And it's really sad the way now he has such a fractured relationship with the rest of the cast. And it's just sad. Like, that's not, you kind of want everyone to still be friends, you know.
Yeah, but he wrote a book, a scandalous book about and revealed all of their secrets. So you can't really be friends. And then he tried to blame it on the ghostwriter and the publisher.
I know, but I feel sorry for him that he got to that stage, that he felt like that was like his only option, like financially.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I actually have a lot of sympathy for the guy to some extent. I mean, obviously he's responsible for his own actions. But you know, I feel a lot of sympathy for people who have gone through this system, and that goes for any child actor on both sides of the pond. But it's interesting because you mentioned the Harry Potter kids, because I think they've come out relatively unscathed out of this, and I think that Britain certainly produces a different sort of breed of celebrity to some extent. I mean, things like Love Island maybe is the counterpoint. Where
No, but you're right. Like it's a different world, and also that's it's just a different thing. Like this in itself, and like the 80s, like we all know the child stars in the 80s kind of ran wild, like the Coreys and all those people. Like they were treated like adults, even though they were really young. And I say the Harry Potter kids were very cloistered and like well looked after. Like I can't imagine they were all running out in parties, like snorting coke at the age of 12 or whatever. Like you hear some of these guys were. Now I'm not talking about Saved by the Bell guys, but like all the Coreys and all that kind of stuff.
Strokes and
I think also. I mean, we were watching recently when we were doing research about like teenagers now watching Saved by the Bell, and I think it was actually Maisie Williams who said that it reminded her of Hollyoaks.
Oh, funny.
And the Hollyoaks does not have the same kind of global reach.
Mm.
So I don't think they're kind of exposed in quite the same manner. Like it's a very much a localized thing in Britain.
Yeah. And it's so like I can't like Saved by the Bell, like whatever you think about it, and like you might like we've gone many years without thinking about it, but when they came back. When they did that Jimmy Fallon sketch a few years ago, like the second you saw the set and the stairs, like that corridor in the school was such an iconic set. Like it's like Central Perk and Friends, as soon as we saw it, we knew it. And the colors and the fashion, like the fashion is so iconic, how they used to dress. Like it's, it was in the 80s, but it was so outlandish. And like Kelly's hair, I love the curls. I was obsessed with Elizabeth Banks' perm. Like, I just remember wanting to look like them and wanting to dress like them, but like you would it would never have happened. And I'm sure teenagers then didn't dress like that in America either. Like it's just so outrageously stylized, but it was so cool.
I gotta disagree. I looked and dressed and like Zack all the time, and I totally pulled it off.
I'm sure. I can't believe that you're kind of just completely ruining my dream and saying that America wasn't really like that.
Like they wore shoulder pads to school. Like that is so like amazing if they did that. I don't know. And we haven't even discussed Mr. Belding at all.
I know. I was just thinking that because you were mentioning him with the Screech thing, and it was again a massive trope of these type of Disney. They're kind of sitcoms, like you mentioned Boy Meets World. I think Home Improvement had the three kids as well. These ones, and these odd male characters that were kind of, I'm thinking of Mr. Feeney and like these weird...
Mr. Feeney was quite clever though, but how did Mr. Belding get his job?
It's a damning indictment of the American school system. Really. That's what Saved by the Bell is trying to tell us.
Yeah, he's trying to be nice, but he was always just trying to be part of the group, wasn't he?
Yeah, it's funny. Like we were watching some old episodes last night, and like there's an episode where Mr. Belding's wife is pregnant, and she's in an elevator and gets stuck with Zack, and like Zack helps deliver the baby. It's just so ridiculous.
Yeah, same one, and said exactly the same thing of just like, what the. It's that point in the writer's room where they're like, we've been going for this long. It's just, go for it.
I just thought of something though. Like maybe that's what, like, we come back to the whole breaking the fourth wall thing. Like it's Zack who's telling the story. So he is the hero. He is the thing. It didn't necessarily mean that's exactly what happened.
You're right.
Oh, you just blown this whole thing wide open for me.
So interesting because from Zack's perspective, when you're a teenager, you would think the principal's that interested in you, when in reality the principal will fleetingly pass you in a car door and tell you off, and they've forgotten about you again. But to Zack, it's like he's the center of Belding's universe.
So guys, Zack is an unreliable narrator, and now we got to write. Joe, you've got to write this fan fiction. We've got to write competing Saved by the Bell fan fiction. We could release it at the same time as a series.
This is blown it wide open. We found it.
It's true though, and it's why he's always the hero of everything.
Oh my God, this is amazing! Imagine if the very end of all of Saved by the Bell had been Zack's reality, and he's like, and it's like Ken Loach level, like despair.
And he's with his friends.
Sat with a dead. It wouldn't be a kestrel, but some kind of bird.
Oh no, that's Phoebe that they reckon that happened. Was that there's a fan theory that Phoebe's in a mental home and has invented her friends. Anyway, that's I digress. It suddenly got very dark.
But it's interesting because a point that you picked up on that we always like to ask in the state of the sitcom, and you pointed out that you've not thought about this for years, and then suddenly, as soon as you hear it or you see a little skit or something, and it just sparks all of these ideas in your head and all the memories and the nostalgia, and then you could talk to someone just from the same, as we said, with 4 people from the same generation who were just able to kind of remember these weird things. And then we always ask how something stands up in 2019 and whether it needs a reboot. What are your thoughts on that? Because we found out something quite interesting while doing some research.
What did you find out?
So how's it?
You just leave that
You're teasing me.
So it's coming back, but it's going to be one of NBC's first Instagram sitcoms. So what they're doing is they're releasing shortened episodes on Instagram. So they're about 3 to 6 minutes versions of the old episodes, but with totally calibrated to Instagram.
Wow.
So calibrated to a new generation who supposedly are thirsty for the tales of Zack.
Yeah, right.
And it's so weird. And then if it works, they're going to kind of do it with other titles and then potentially original material as well. And I was just reading this going, fuck, like
That's a terrible idea.
I think it's a great idea because it's so visual and Instagram's so visual. Like, honestly, the outfits are like every single outfit, the fashion is incredible in the show. And like Instagram is so about imagery and about clothes and about how things look. And like you could, like, honestly, like all we did last night was talk about their clothes when we were watching.
You think Gen Z are going to sit there and watch 6 minutes of this nonsense?
I honestly think you're talking about Gen Z, but like Instagram has got a really young audience, and this show is a really young audience. Like you're talking 10-year-olds. Like you're not talking anything older than that. I think a younger audience, it would still resonate with them. Yeah. It may need to be on YouTube. I mean, I don't know what platform they'd be on, but I honestly think it holds up. Like watching it last night, I thought, I mean, obviously, like, it's a bit tedious. And luckily, someone has put some of the episodes cut down to 10-minute versions on YouTube, which is quite funny.
I think that's basically you're exactly right, that they're catering...
shorter attention span.
Yeah.
What Cathy said is it's catering towards 10-year-olds who are sat on YouTube that aren't, they have a finite amount of screen time, probably. And so something like this, which has got a easy plot, which is Zack does something to someone, some people tell him some things about doing that thing, and then he gets to the end of it and either does or doesn't do that thing.
It's pretty much how the show
You just
works.
read that from the IMDb synopsis.
That's how we pitched. That's how we pitched to a production company.
The synopsis I wrote, which was kids being dicks.
Yeah. But yeah, and so it's a perfectly, I can actually see it working, of just these quick snapshots. We've seen that Friends has worked well on streaming platforms for younger generations. It's just quick snapshots of something that has already had all the work done for it. I mean, it's a damning indictment of the production companies that are relying on 25-year-old, 30-year-old material.
Yeah, it's interesting that they re-edit rather than reboot.
Yeah.
Because I think...
Well, they've rebooted it like 5 times already.
Yeah, but they could... Oh no, they have done that. Yeah, no, don't worry.
I mean, like, honestly, like, even just, that there's that stuff where, like, Slater and two of the girls, Kelly, and they did like a dance, like a music video for these bands they were trying to sell.
It was a commercial.
Like there's so many iconic moments. There's that moment where Slater rips his clothes off and he's like wearing a wrestling outfit and he starts like ballet dancing. There's a lot of iconic visual stuff. Like, it's really cool. Like, I honestly think it looks really cool. And I found it funny when we went back and watched the wedding, like Zack and Kelly's wedding.
Yeah.
And it didn't look as good because she's just in like a boring wedding dress and has boring hair, and he's in a tux. What's interesting is like the crazy fashion they used to wear, and I just totally see it holding up on Instagram. I think it's such a good idea.
I think a shell suit wedding dress is definitely the thing for 2019.
But in terms of like if we were to talk about reboots, no, I don't think it's something like, I think it's something that's of its time, and to try and reboot it would be just really crap, like they did with the New Class or whatever it was called.
Totally.
Wow. I mean, there's so much more we can talk about. As we've said, we've hardly touched upon even some of the main cast, but now that we know it's all in Zack's head, I think that's kind of
I'm not going to top that.
But yeah, and so yeah, it's such an amazing sitcom from an era that I think was full of them. If that,
full of sitcoms,
full of great sitcoms. I think for it to stand out And maybe that's our generation. Maybe that's because we were the perfect target market for it. And other people are going to listen to this and go, what the fuck are these idiots talking about? It was on at the same time as, I don't know, Cheers or something like that. You know, it's not in the same ballpark. But in terms of other sitcoms from that period, or brand new or even older, what would be your favourite sitcom? Like what else do you call out as top bar material?
For me, it's Arrested Development.
Oh wow!
Ooh.
They said from that time, though.
Oh, did you? Oh, sorry, I wasn't listening. That's my favourite sitcom of all time.
That's what we want, yeah.
That is what they said.
Oh, sorry, I thought you meant specifically
listen
from, like, 80s,
listen
90s.
to the show that you're on, Cathy.
I mean, my favourite sitcoms, definitely Friends, and I would probably say like Quality Towers, because they're just so good. And we used to be really into The Big Bang Theory, and we were really into Modern Family, but I can't watch. I think they've both gone so dramatically downhill in probably the last 4 seasons.
We got really sick of those and wouldn't go back to
I
them.
would never go back and watch them. Like, I know it's the last ever season of Big Bang Theory, I don't care. Whereas, you know, the last season of Friends, while it may have lagged a little bit, we all tuned in to see what happened in Friends. Do not care what happens in any of these shows. And it's a sign, and I know sitcoms don't rate as well as they used to, and networks are really desperate for successful comedy, so they're keeping them on for a very long time. Like Big Bang Theory had its day probably 6 seasons ago. And Big Bang Theory did something that I find really unusual, and you guys are way more sitcom experts than us. But Big Bang Theory had a core cast of the 4 guys and 1 woman. And then somewhere in the middle, they changed the core cast to be the 4 men and 3 women.
Yeah.
And I found it really jarring as a viewer to suddenly have 2 further characters, which are Bernadette and Amy, even though I never minded them as peripheral characters. It's like you don't suddenly bring Gunther in to be one of, you know, the friends. And like, even when Paul Rudd was in Friends, he wasn't he wasn't a main character. And it's weird because I was suddenly following plots of Amy and Bernadette, and I was like, but these aren't my core characters. No. I don't care about them.
Just like Poochie. I got 2 Poochie references in the same podcast.
And I found that, and actually, you know, I find it fascinating they did that in Big Bang Theory, and I think it rapidly went downhill because they lost focus, and I think 7 characters was just too many. And the core thing of the Big Bang Theory, what had been so good, was the guys' interaction, and then kind of Penny as the antagonist. But they're all just married and loved up now, and, you know, just doesn't make sense anymore, the sitcom.
All right, Cathy, save it for the Big Bang episode.
Coming next week.
I think that's so interesting, because that is one of the key things of sitcom is don't fuck with the formula too much. Obviously, you need to keep it fresh. But
but keep your core characters, right?
Friends knew to get some characters together, so when Chandler and Monica were together, that was able to progress because Joey was still Joey, and Ross went even further backwards into Ross. You know, they kept the other 6, 5, 3, 4. 4.
And we're on. The podcast just started.
We're pressing record.
I'd forgotten that was the beginning of Big Bang Theory, was 5 characters. Yeah, it's really weird that you mentioned that.
They had a lot of flack because it was 4 guys and 1 woman, and the woman was not a scientist and stuff. So they introduced these female characters. But I've not really watched it kind of linear, but I've caught a lot of episodes over the years, and it is like watching 2 different shows.
It's 2 completely different shows, and that was to say I missed like a season and came back into it and just went. And I'm always the first to say there's not enough women and things, but if that's your show and the core is 4 geeky men, like. Don't like it's suddenly just a different show, and it's so boring when the premise is 4 geeky guys who are single to suddenly 4 married men. Like, that's just a completely different show.
Then on the flip side, you've got Arrested Development, which somehow manages to keep flipping the way they show the premise, but the premise has always remained the same of this family and their struggles
and
for
there's always
money.
Yeah,
and that's really interesting.
Very success as well, right? Because obviously the latter series of that sitcoms tend to go downhill really.
I would say that the season 5 of Arrested Development is unwatchable. I don't know if I can even do the second half.
Wow. Of the early edition where it's everyone's stories in an episode, or when they came back and they were doing the kind of
when they recut it.
No, I mean the brand new, most recent one that just came out on Netflix.
We haven't watched that yet.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's very, very, very disappointing.
But yeah, we're like totally digressing. And it's really interesting because when I read it, I'd forgotten that I had also seen the college years of Saved by the Bell. And the college years was, I think it might have just been Zack, Screech and Slater. I can't remember. It wasn't all of them. And again, it didn't work and it got cancelled after one season. I think because they were in college and kind of nominally tackling more senior issues, but in reality, not really. So you've kind of lost your tween audience, I think, by the time you're hitting college. It doesn't quite make sense. And it wouldn't have changed. And you didn't have the core cast. And, it's just, I'm glad they gave that one up. And it made more sense to bring them all back for the movie of Zack and Kelly getting married at like a ridiculously young age. But it makes sense. And I think they, as a spin-off, it was a good idea to have Screech and Belding because they were, decent supporting characters. It makes sense. Like, it was worth a go. And clearly it was relatively successful to run for twice as long as the original show.
For some reason in my head, and I might have this completely wrong way around, but isn't the new class like the origins of California Dreams?
Oh my God, you're cracking so many things wide open here.
I don't know. I hadn't heard that.
It might just share some cast members. And this is a vague memory, and I'm going back 20 years here.
I gotta say, when you asked us to do this, I floated California Dreams as another option. I was obsessed with that.
I was, but I can't remember anything except for the theme song.
I can remember all the songs.
Every episode they ended up singing a song in the cafe, and there was some surfboards in the titles.
so many great songs. The Weatherman says that there's rain today, but I ain't going out. No way.
I can't believe you remember that.
That's amazing.
The Witch.
No, that's Don't Blame It on the Weatherman.
Sorry.
Wow.
When you hear the Saved by the Bell music though, like last night, like we couldn't stop singing it. Like it is such an iconic theme song.
I've heard it.
When I wake up in the morning, I sing it every day.
Thank you for making that a thing in our lives again.
Oh no, it's bad news when you hear it.
Go into Sweet Galaxy High, but
Oh man, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, again, it's thank you for talking about your favourite sitcoms there. They're such a kind of part of our society now, and it's just so interesting, especially from the different things that people find as they come up. And it's been nice for us to find shows and stuff like that. So I know you've both given not much of a plug to the new series of Arrested Development,
but I will endlessly plug the first 3 seasons of Arrested Development because I think that's perfect television, and I've watched it 10-15 times through. I could just watch it forever, and anyone who hasn't watched it, I insist on them watching it. So yeah, watch that.
And Fawlty Towers really benefits from not only like being an incredibly well made show, but that 12 episode run, like, like the shorter the better. And for Saved by the Bell itself, disregarding the spin-offs, 3 seasons is a really decent run. And it's probably one of the reasons it has stayed so iconic. And I just think, it's always a case when things go into these like 10, 11, 12 series runs at this point of like, you can have 24 episodes of Modern Family in a season and it's gone way past season 10. Like that's a lot of episodes of something. Like the best show in the world can't sustain that sort of thing.
Yeah, 2 seasons, that's it.
Yeah, 2 seasons in a movie. Cool. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. I think we've talked more Saved by the Bell than any adults for whatever.
Yeah.
But I loved it, so thank you very much. Any last thoughts? Any closing thoughts, like Jerry Springer?
No, but thank you for having us. And yeah, it was like, as I said, a bit of a left field pick from us. And apologies, we're probably not as knowledgeable about this as other people you've had about other sitcoms. But we had such a kick, like rewatching it all, to be honest. And it's interesting now as a parent, for sure, I would not mind at all. My son was older and he was watching this, whereas some things I watch now through that lens and I think, I wouldn't want him watching it. Well,
it teaches him the life lesson that marijuana is the equivalent of doing heroin or murdering someone. Basically.
All should have
dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's some moral lessons in there and it looks great. Like, honestly, I'm going to watch these Instagram cut downs and see what they do with it. I reckon it's going to be completely iconic.
It is actually interesting. I'm just thinking, when you contrast it with, and because we were kind of contrasting it with British TV earlier, like over on Saved by the Bell, they're like, calling out an actor for doing marijuana and doing a PSA, literally a PSA on that. And then over in Grange Hill, Zamo's doing heroin.
Yeah.
It's like there's definitely a bit of a contrast there.
It's a bit grittier in London. Well, thank you so much, because we had a lot of fun going back and watching all those the old episodes as well. So where can our listeners find you?
We are at the Cinemile on Twitter and Instagram, or just search the Cinemile on wherever you're listening to this podcast or any podcasts.
Really recommend the Cinemile. It's such a joy to listen to, both for you guys, and also you have so many amazing guests come on. I think you had the Can You Forgive? I still can't remember the fucking name.
Craig Parkinson, yeah. From the Two Shot Podcast.
Yeah, from the Two Shot Podcast, also known as Dot from Line of Duty. So we were highly starstruck when we met him, because we love Line of Duty so much.
Because I love that thing about, because you actually get to the cinema somehow amazingly with a newborn. Still,
it's hard,
amazingly often, and so like I'll always kind of come on and go, I don't want to listen to that one just yet because I'm going to go see it this week. But then, so when you see a film come on and be able to listen to you guys back hearing it, it's so enjoyable.
Yeah,
I love it.
We love it. Thank
you.
Thanks very much, guys, and thanks for having us on.
Yeah, such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Great. Well, we will be back with more Stay at the Sitcom. Remember to follow us online at the usual channels at Judgecast, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts if you're so inclined. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.